it's pretty ruthless. I find it hard to watch those opening scenes in Saving Private Ryan because they are so brutal. And I'm not trying to shock or scare you or somehow, move you emotionally into some place that God doesn't want you to go. I'm simply trying to describe the nature of the world in which you live. When you were born into a world at war. Scripture makes that very clear. In fact, if you go back and you look, battle and warfare is the entire backdrop of the Bible, right? I mean, you go Exodus, which is the great story of the deliverance of God's people and a symbolic story about the salvation of mankind through Jesus Christ. It is battle. God goes to war to set his people free. And then it's war to get to the promised land, and it's war to keep the promised land, right? I mean, it's just one battle after another. Deborah goes to war, Samson goes to war, Joshua goes to war, David goes to war, right? And the story doesn't change when Jesus comes. Not as gentle Jesus, meek and mild. He comes as a great warrior for his people. He casts out foul spirits. He comes right against the doctrine of the Pharisees. He comes to heal the brokenhearted and set the captive free. He is loving and he is fierce. And when he returns, it is in the saddle, right? Robe dipped in blood, the armies of heaven behind him. It is the backdrop of the reality in which we live. Now, I believe that we live in a love story. Okay? And it is primarily about that, but it is a love story set in the midst of a life and death battle. And if you think I'm exaggerating, how do you explain reality? How do you explain the story of your father's life and what happened to him? How do you explain the men around you? I mean, you see the incredible devastation. Guys completely taken out, or in captivity, or bondage, or so badly wounded, they can barely crawl up the beach. Right? I mean, really, you sit down and listen to any person's story with honesty and compassion, it will break your heart. We live in a world at war. And the reason that you were given the heart of a warrior and the heart for adventure, right, and to rescue is because you're needed. You're needed. And you will need that whole heart to live in the gospel that Jesus is telling, to live in the full reality of the story that is unfolding. Because while the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth was the climax of Act 3, the story's not over, right? I mean, he has ransomed us and called us his allies now. He's called us into his clan, into his family, to be his brothers. He's restoring us to the Father. But we still have a mission. Act 3 is still unfolding. And soon will come Act 4. There is so much more to say about Act 3, and it sheds so much light on our lives. For one thing, no wonder we long for beauty and intimacy and adventure. We were made for Eden. This isn't the world in which our heart was created for. And it isn't wrong to long for those things. Of course we have these desires in us for life, real life. We were created to live in that. And secondly, your story does not begin with sin. It doesn't begin in Genesis chapter 3. It begins in Genesis chapter 1 with a glory and a dignity bestowed upon you. Sin is not the deepest thing about you. The image of God is. And that's what makes us so valuable. That's what gives us such honor. And that's what makes sin so tragic. And thirdly, Christianity is not about going to church and saying our prayers and minding our manners. Can you begin to see that it is a love story set in the midst of a life and death battle? That explains our days. And if we'll begin to take that perspective into our life, it will shed light on so many things. For God is still coming for us as our hero. And there are so many places in our lives that we still need Him to rescue us. And also, The villain is still coming after us as our enemy. And there are so many ways he's trying to take us out, especially at the level of the heart. And that's why Proverbs tells us to watch over our heart with everything we've got, because out of the heart flows the wellspring of life. We live in a love story set in the midst of a life and death battle. And if you'll go back now to those movies that you'll love, you'll begin to see in them some of the lessons that we need to learn for our own journey and for our own battle. This is going to take courage. It's going to take love. It's going to take sacrifice. In fact, it's going to take everything you are and everything you've got.